All right, we're going to get this thing started. First of all, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Depending on what time zone you're in right now. We're right here in Dallas, Texas. We're kind of straddling both morning and evening. So first of all, I just want to welcome you to our webinar today. We're really talking about today's top cybersecurity threats. And when we use the word today, it's kind of our new normal today that we've all been using end over end. It's like it's not going away. So I wanted to start by introducing myself. My name is Mark Coltharp, and I am the Executive Vice President of Client Solutions at Zyston. First of all, I really appreciate y'all time. We know your time is valuable, and spending your lunch with us, we really appreciate it. Secondly, you know, the one thing we like to do is I've been in cybersecurity for 25 years. My network is a major asset to me. So once you get introduced to our two panelists, reach out on LinkedIn, link up with us, because again, we want to expand our network and more importantly, get you on our team, because really cybersecurity is practiced as a team. So feel free to join our team, link in with us. We're always around for collaboration. I wanted to start by introducing our two panelists. Our first panelist is Greg Foss. Greg is a senior security strategist with VMware Carbon Black, where he focuses on large-scale security research, threat intelligence, and strategic product development. You know, in his previous roles, Greg's led a threat research team. He's built and ran a global security operations program, consulted as a pen tester, and one of my favorite, Greg, is actually worked as a security analyst for the federal government. Hey, Greg, just show him hey, wave there.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah. So our next participant here is a guy I work with all the time. And again, this is David. David Stanton has been in the industry for 21 years. He's a veteran cybersecurity practitioner and consultant. He spent a career helping high-profile companies build, sustain, and enhance their security programs. You know, David's held many leadership roles in various capacities, including leading a healthcare practice, cybersecurity practice for a national consulting firm here in the US, along with several positions as a CISO. Again, I've worked with David a long time. He's a great resource, and I'm really excited to have him on. Hey, David.
Hey,
yeah,
thanks for having
joining
me.
us.
Welcome.
You got it. Now, the one really unique thing about our two panelists is I really loved a little bit of different perspective each one has. You know, when you look at Greg, he's really been focused heavily on industry research, what's going on, how do you develop products to thwart these types of attacks? And then David, on the other hand, spends a lot of his time out at the customer sites working on building programs. So I thought they'd be a great different perspectives to work from. Now, the really important thing, the rules of the road for this. So we're not lecturing everybody here. We really want this to be bi-directional and collaborative. So it's more of a roundtable feel. So at the bottom of the Zoom, you'll see a question answer. And the way we're going to work this is I'm going to go ahead and I'll read out to the panelists as soon as I see any of your questions come up, and we'll just present them to the panelists and let them go at it. So let's get this thing started. David, as we wait for any questions to come in, I wanted to ask you and Greg something. You know, I've been spending a lot of time out there with this new normal for us. And with that being said, you know, we talk about all the different threats during this COVID period, but some of them aren't all just these adversaries. A lot of them, the businesses are actually driving themselves. And what I mean by that, I know a customer, they're out there and they're driving these applications. They're a retailer and they had to shut down their retail stores, but they had to develop something quickly so they could interact and still drive revenues for their companies. So they built an online collaborative platform in which they could engage their customers at home, understand their past buying habits, and then place an order and have curbside pickup in the same day. So you can imagine this new collaboration platform they had to develop, but they had to deliver it in 21 days. And from y'all's perspective, how do you feel as a CISO having to kind of go at breakneck speeds, and you know, you don't get the chance to measure twice and cut once, you got to measure and cut as you're going. I kind of wanted to start with you, David. What's some of your thoughts? And then Greg, if you don't mind, from what you see from that perspective, and if y'all are seeing the same problems out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Mark. I can tell you that there's all various different situations that clients are having to deal with. You know, like you said, in a 21-day rollout, you don't get to do your kind of adequate due diligence around, you know, how you do software development, how you secure code, going through the kind of the typical process for which you're evaluating your risks and your threats of doing that. And so you've kind of had to essentially, you know, do a real quick agile approach to rolling out a major product into production. And there are just tons of risks in association with that. And I think right now, a lot of my clients are actually having to go kind of recursively back and look at their environments that they just rolled out and finding a number of kind of susceptible areas. And so, you know, my comment to this is that, you know, one, you should assess your risks and know what you're putting out there. So you're building an application that really truly is going to meet the kind of client need or the customer need in this scenario. But you're also mitigating your risk to your environment. I know that everybody's seen the Zoom bombs where everybody's coming into your Zoom calls. You know, conceptually, that was the risk that Zoom didn't even think about when they first came in. So there's been a lot of rollouts around this, and I would just say have a well-defined process. Look at your risks. You know, good pen tests. Look at the risk from an external perspective. Address the availability risks in association with that too, because I think oftentimes, you know, you roll out something really quickly and you don't think about the demands for it, and you know, there's always concerns with you've kind of overfulfilled basically the supply of the application. So thinking about that strategically, and then, you know, of course, have a well-defined kind of framework for security. And if you can apply that consistently across all apps and all technologies and people, process, technology, you're going to have a solution that's going to meet the client needs and the customer needs and protect their assets too.
Yeah, Greg.
Yeah. So no, I completely agree with what David was saying. You know, I think like if you have time to do all of these things in the right order, you know, that's such a key component. And right now, that's something organizations don't have. You know, they're forced to come up with these solutions and adapt, or they lose money. And so, you know, when you're looking at this risk of like, do I put out this service that could potentially be vulnerable, could open us up to risk, you know, all these types of things, you know, there's that risk to it, but also you have to look at my business could go under if I don't provide this service. So I kind of look at it as like a double-edged sword in a way. Like I think the innovations that are going to come out of this time period are actually going to be pretty fascinating. You know, they're forcing people to adopt to this new way of doing business across all types of industries. And so, you know, with that comes in innovation naturally. You either innovate or die at this point. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, total double-edged sword type of thing. Like I think it's awesome to see companies doing this, but every single new service like this extends their attack surface and opens them up to additional risk, both business and security risk.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, you guys, one of the things we had talked about with that one retail customer was having the ability for all these applications, they're pushing their high value targets out to the edge of their network, obviously through cloud, but these high value targets are applications, their services, their databases, right? And the one thing we've been working with customers to do is find a way to do an internal rapid security assessment on that platform. So you're not just posting, you're going through at least your own internal assessments on any particular vulnerabilities or architectures that can leave you liable. No, that's great. So guys, real quick, I have a question that's come in here and I'm gonna read this off to y'all. And I'm gonna start with Greg this time, but it says, with all the recent targeted ransomware attacks, along with ransomware as a service, it seems some companies are hedging their insurance policy to pay their ransoms to minimize outages. With your experience recently, are you seeing a lot of companies now paying these ransoms since they're highly targeted on their high value targets?
Yeah. So the big things we're seeing with ransomware specifically is they're advancing in a lot of different ways right now. One of the kind of scarier aspects we've seen of ransomware in particular is this new extortion component. So a lot of it is they're actually mapping out these organizations, doing scans inside, understanding what their footprint is, establishing multiple redundant command and control access back into this organization, so that at a later time, you know, they can come back in, they can do other attacks, you know. But the big thing we're seeing is the theft of data from the companies. Oftentimes, you know, they're taking whatever their core intellectual property is, they're exfiltrating this data, and then they're taking that as a means of, say, the organization does decide to restore from backups, or they have a means to, the ransomware didn't actually destroy their backups. They have another means to make money off of these intrusions, and that is through extorting these companies. They're either threatening them to release all their IP on the internet, their customer lists, you know, their source code, whatever's most important to this company. They've already stolen it. They have access to it, and they're charging them to not disclose it, or they're just openly auctioning this data. You know, really depends on how the organization dealt with the ransomware actors, because they actually run like a complete business now with like a support channels and stuff like that. And it's kind of funny how if you're actually nicer to these guys, they're gonna maybe give you a little break, because all of them can be haggled with and stuff like that. But you really have to look at the whole risk of this now. Look for data leaving your environment, and a lot more concerning than traditional ransomware we saw, say, a year ago, where it was just someone got phished, you know, it clicked the email and it automatically executed and did its stuff. Another thing we're seeing is their ability to bypass endpoint protection technologies of all kinds. They're looking into the details of how we do our detections of ransomware, and they're actively evading those controls, you know, such as canary files and sinkholes and all these other technologies we put in place to try and prevent this. They're actively working to subvert those, and you know, they're stepping up their game. And ransomware as a service is something now we're seeing take off entirely. You know, that's lowers the bar, making it very easy for someone who maybe doesn't have that initial exploitation experience to get into the game. Maybe they go buy access into an organization from the same marketplace that they bought access to this ransomware as a service. This also makes it difficult for folks in our positions, you know, trying to do attribution. So, I mean, that's just touching the tip of the iceberg on this. So there's a lot to ransomware nowadays. That actually makes it a very interesting type of malware to look into.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Greg, I've never thought about the ransomware as a service, making it harder to get the attribution, because now you're reusing someone else's tool fingerprints and things from a digital forensic standpoint. That's a great point. David, kind of from the operational side, well, what are you seeing? What are you?
Yeah. I mean, it is a very tough paradigm that companies are in. You're basically, you know, paying a thief money, and should you ultimately trust a thief to do the right thing? And you know, my general perception is that based upon, you know, what the type of ransomware software that's being used, is there, you know, a way to fix that or not fix it? And in some cases, there's not a way to fix it. So you've got a very set line amount of time, and you know, whether it's a day or two, and you have to make a decision, or basically all your environment is gone. So you know, I'd say that the important point is, you know, what's the impact? And you know, can you trust that if you pay $100,000 to a thief, that they're going to provide the you know, the due diligence to unblock you and unlock you? And I tend to tell clients that I would not do that because that's negotiating with the thief. But I do think there are certain circumstances where that might be feasible. But you know, as for kind of the point around insurance, you know, I really think that insurance too often is not an alternative for having good security practice. You really have to have both. So you need to do your due diligence. You need to assess where your risks are, evaluate your maturity, your capabilities. Actually, Zyston has what we call the Cybercast assessment. So it looks at all your capabilities and all your maturity, and essentially gives you kind of a risk rating around a number of various kind of capabilities, so that we can actually track someone and increasing their maturity, increasing their capabilities within the environment. And you know, the whammy is in insurance. You know, they're also being pretty diligent about, you know, denying claims too. So if you haven't done your due diligence and you haven't looked at all your capabilities, and you don't know where you are, and you don't have the minimum, you know, security requirements, you just put yourself in a hard spot, because the insurance claim, you know, insurance companies probably by default almost deny most claims. So you got to be really careful and leaning on that too much, because you didn't do your due diligence and you didn't do your kind of adequate security program design.
Yeah, all good points. So another question we have, give me a second here. Oh, COVID has really changed how organizations are treating the remote workforce concept. What are some of the pressing security risk exposures that organizations should be thinking through, but are not, right? So what are they not thinking about? And I think, David, I'm going to bounce that one off to you first and then rotate over to Greg.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different areas that, you know, are susceptible to risk in this environment. I'd say, number one, third-party risk, because you're really in many kind of functions and many capabilities, you're putting more out in the cloud. You're changing, you're altering an existing solution to provide additional functionality and capabilities, and you're really kind of leaning on your third parties pretty significantly. And the challenge is that number one, you might not have done your due diligence on the front end around those third parties, but you need to be able to hold them to the same stick that you do. So, and that's not the basic. You should hold them essentially to a higher stick, right? Because they're protecting your assets, and you want them to do a really good job of that. So I think third-party risk is pretty significant. Tons of security exposures. You need to do due diligence. You need to have a well-designed kind of security framework. I'd say another one is now we've got everybody working in the remote workforce, and really you've moved the edge of your network. Now you have these endpoints that are connecting from home PCs and through unsecure, you know, wireless networks and connected with IoT devices, you know, intermingled. You got your kids, you know, bringing home, you know, malware into, you know, your house, and you're really you're kind of attempting to put a lot of risk in your company when you're allowing that. So you really need really well designed kind of security controls around the endpoint and that connectivity of that remote user. I'd say the other aspect is what we've seen too is now you've got all these individuals and they have all these entitlements and they have all these kind of access to all the applications out there. And for the most part, they might not need all that. And, you know, to do the basic functions, you almost have to readdress, you know, what are the entitlements of kind of the role or the individual and what they're trying to achieve in their kind of business functions. And so really it's pretty important for, I think, companies to do their due diligence around that, the role design, the access entitlements that they're gaining access to. And then most importantly, are they protecting the assets and how they actually connect to the environment? But those are probably three of the bigger ones.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, from your side, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it's one of these things where I'd actually say, you know, we've been moving to this perimeter has been shifting for years already, right? That moving further away from having everything in your nice hard shell of the corporation where everyone has to VPN to get stuff. I mean, you know, we've seen cloud technologies, a big uptick there over the past multiple years, just because, you know, it's much easier for people to maintain. They can offload the risk of securing these systems to the vendor themselves. So, you know, it's less like overhead for them. So we've been seeing this shift anyway. But now, you know, with the coronavirus situation, it's really pushed that into overdrive and forced people who were not looking at this before now to consider these options and figure out, you know, what they're actually going to do for their workforce. So with that, you know, if you're making these rapid changes, there's always going to be risk there. There's going to be, you know, room for error introduced throughout these kind of situations. But really, you know, it's one of these things where the perimeter is, I've viewed the perimeter as no more anyway for a while. I mean, everyone has mobile phones and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, you have your Slack connected to your phone. And the biggest target is always going to be your end users at the end of the day. No matter what, people are going to go after your users. You know, we just saw that major arrest recently for an insider who was trying to be bribed by someone in Russian intelligence and actually ended up turning them in, which was good. But I mean, you know, they're going to try any angle. And, you know, the reason they went for trying to bribe this person is probably because it was a difficult company to breach. And so that was their next kind of avenue. But the big thing we're seeing now in terms of the remote workers that I don't think people are really focusing on is these attacks against home networks specifically. We've seen a lot of new uptick in chatter around router exploits and looking at how to attack people's home networks specifically. Like I guarantee most organizations have not given their employees training on, you know, how to install a home firewall, how to segment your work corporate assets from your family's assets, maybe, and your IoT assets. So, you know, all of these things incur additional risk and are surprisingly easy to gain access to in home networks. You know, and just the home networks themselves. If you're not securing your wireless router, you know, you have your old deprecated web settings and stuff like that. You know, you're going to be able to be popped that way. And if someone can get onto your home network, there's a reasonable assumption to make that they can ride your access into your corporation. So that's a big thing I would look at is helping people understand how to actually secure their home networks better, because that is the new perimeter for many organizations.
Yeah, man, Greg, that's a really good point. Thinking about that, how we can help our customers help their home networks. You know, here's some base rules. And, you know, like I have a lot of kids at home, and I know I found 2 rogue access points my 9th grader put in his room for his gaming. So that's a really good point. But Greg, you know, you have a really interesting background, and I want to pose this question to you based off the last question. And so this shift in remote workforce and how we're all handling this on the fly, with your role with its helping out strategic product development, is that making you guys re-strategize and think how you're building out the VMware Carbon Black, and where is it going to have to go with this? I mean, anything interesting there we can know before it comes out in the market?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's something where, you know, fortunately with Carbon Black's service offering, we've been moving to a cloud-focused solution for quite some time now. And I mean, I think that's the biggest thing for any solution now is you have to have the ability for these remote assets to be able to communicate with the mothership, so to speak. And so, you know, traditionally, like if you look at traditional SIM implementations on corporate networks where they're doing log forwarding, a lot of that relies on being able to see these endpoints and be able to push data within a enclosed space. So, you know, when you're looking at distributed assets where people are probably not connected to the corporate VPN or they don't have to access certain resources, you want to be able to maintain that visibility into these assets. So that's the biggest thing on the Carbon Black side is fortunately we've been moving in that direction already. So we're very well prepared for the current situation we're seeing today. You know, on the VMware side, they're doing a lot of real cool stuff with in terms of like spinning up and down these static VMs that basically, you know, blow away everything when you're done using it, but retain your documents and things of that nature. Yeah. So, you know, you get popped on one of these VDI instances, you know, you just nuke it, start over. Of course, there's ways, you know, you can look at persisting through these reboots and stuff like that, but you know, that's getting to another level, right? You're just making it harder for someone to actually attack your users. And that's at the end of the day, the best we can do is really just shift this, make it time consuming, make it expensive for people to compromise networks.
Yeah, and being so dynamic, it makes it much more complex as you spin up the VDIs, roll them down, up, it's continuously moving. That's great. So I've got a couple more questions coming in, and for all of our attendees out there, please just keep entering your questions, and I'll try to get to all of them if I can here. Let me see, the next question came in. Let me see. It's along the same lines, but anyway, how do you see the landscape of cybersecurity changing due to the push for remote workforce, and in regards to how attackers are exploiting new vulnerabilities and how solutions / companies have to adapt to combat these threats? So I want to start with Greg this time.
All right. I mean, like, some of the stuff we've seen, in terms of chatter around just the general like kind of threat landscape is actually looking at some even low tech sort of attacks. Like, do people at home have paper shredders, and are they using those, for their sensitive documents and stuff? We've seen some red teams now doing sanctioned engagements against corporations, now targeting specific employees' homes and doing like dumpster diving at their house on trash day. So even these low tech kind of things are now going to be in scope, both for maybe sanctioned assessments, which, I mean, that's definitely gray area in my opinion. But, also the just more targeted attacks against people's corporate assets in their home networks, and even going after personal accounts. All these things that, are outside of the scope of what you'd traditionally monitor in an organization, but are very effective ways to trick people. I mean, even if you just go through like LinkedIn or Twitter, establish some rapport with someone using an alias account or something like that, you can trick most anyone into doing anything. I mean, even us that are in security and are aware of these things, if someone's dedicated enough, they can figure out a way. And so I always think it's going to come back to that user and being able to understand when a user is compromised using the security tooling and that defense in depth that you have in place within your organization.
Great. David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, most of the threats and the attacks, I don't think are anything that we haven't seen before, but they've been kind of created and crafted to really, I'd say, be most effective in their usage. A lot of continued phishing attacks on individuals to, register for even like you can go out and get your shot for ultimately COVID, and you have to register information, and people are using that for like vaccinations ultimately. And I was like, wow, that's a really kind of nasty thing to do. But people are really, all about kind of getting after the individual. And if they can get on one's home PC, they can easily kind of laterally move to their corporate network. Really, I think that the attacks are really going a lot focused on the individual, I'd say, and that would probably be one area. I will say, like, I think there's the advanced threat too, where a lot of our attackers right now know that everybody is in a very susceptible spot, and I think our adversaries basically are going after governmental assets right now, because you've got a lot of workforce that are working in remote. I'm still pretty concerned around the kind of critical infrastructure side of things right now, just because it's always been fairly susceptible, and then now you have these remote workers that not potentially run nuclear facilities, but they run energy companies and gas companies, and one alteration of a SCADA environment could essentially cause mass explosions, and it puts people in a very susceptible way. But I'd say we're going to continue to see the attackers going after kind of the weakest link, and I think in many cases individuals are really kind of the focus there. So
yeah, that's a great response as well. this next question, it kind of touched on something Greg touched on, and then you touched on, and it was, how effective is the legacy peel the onion concept of defense in depth? And are current attackers able to break down the layers easily? And I know Greg had mentioned about the way to bypass some clients, and David, you touched on this. So if you wouldn't mind, David, just kind of start us out, and then I'm going to hop over to Greg on this
Yeah.
one. This is a really great question. It came from Brandon.
Well, yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, everybody knows the defense in depth concept, or the peel the onion, is meant to provide multiple layers for somebody that's an adversary to ultimately get to your crown jewels, or what is critical to your environment. And the whammy is that as you put solutions and technologies in place, in some cases they don't all work together effectively, and you don't monitor across multiple technologies, or some companies don't. And so I tend to believe that, and the other risk is, one lost password or one privileged account that's compromised literally blows that whole stack and the whole ability to get between the various kind of barriers and association with that. So my personal opinion is, the concept of passwords has been dead for a long time. And people are still going after kind of the multi-factor authentication attacks, where you've got Office 365 out there, and they're using MFA. Well, I know that this individual hasn't registered, so I can specifically enable and enact basically the text messaging that's going to provide that single access control. And so people are going after the attack methods there. I tend to like the zero trust model a little bit better. Of course, I do think the peel the onion concept works in some cases well, because it does provide kind of solutions and protection mechanisms. But zero trust is the concept of basically you are untrusted to anything unless you're explicitly trusted. And nothing trusts each other, and you have to basically be trusted in order to actually provide that. And I tend to like that a lot better from a concept perspective, because it doesn't allow for the domino effect of a lost password, or a compromised MFA credentials, or a privileged attacker basically that goes rogue and wants to attack internal assets. They have to be enabled and enacted and trusted in order to actually achieve that. So, my answer is a little bit of a cliche one too, but assessing risk is pretty important here too. So you need to know where your risks are, and what you're going to do to protect your kind of key assets and your key business functions. And I tend to see that environments never probably did a great job of doing kind of the risk due diligence there. But I think it is a time right now where you need to effectively assess risk and constantly kind of evaluate, these tools and these technologies. What are they doing kind of to your cybersecurity threat landscape? Are they improving things? Is it minimal? Is it a significant value to it? And there's a lot of mitigation. So you really need to have a really synergized kind of strategy around that.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, what are your thoughts on the defense in depth, especially when you look? And it's funny, I had a quote from a customer about 3 months ago that's a huge VMware Carbon Black customer. And he kind of we talked about the defense in depth, and he kind of said, hey, my Carbon Black is my last line. And when I can remediate to it, it kind of gives me that, oh my gosh, everything else failed. But what are your thoughts, Greg?
Yeah. I think now, with the whole workforce kind of shifting, the defense in depth approach is still valid, but certain controls are definitely going to be missing now. The big one we've seen that's been very difficult to compensate for now is the loss of network telemetry. Unless you have something like an always on VPN, where you're forcing your users through a proxy or always through a corporate asset of some kind, you're not going to be able to see, all the network data, which is a key component of detecting threats and understanding if there's an existing compromise, looking for beaconing activity, looking for data exfiltration. So it makes it a lot easier for attackers now, once they're on an asset that is off the corporate network, to maybe just steal data directly from that asset. So I think what we're going to see now is a shift in terms of agents and what their ability is to detect and monitor for some of these types of activities. But also, to David's point, I think zero trust is a key control here. And that's something where, you need to validate the authenticity of this user for every single type of asset that they're accessing. Whether it's a network asset, a web asset, whatever it is, you want to validate their account. You want to validate what permissions they have when they are inside of this asset. And all of that, is a key component of what zero trust is actually doing now. So I would say that's going to be one of the tools, or one of the, I guess, I don't even know if you'd call it a tool, right? Zero trust is kind of a all-encompassing sort of ecosystem. But I think those kind of key technologies are going to be very important when it comes to actually protecting organizations and making sure you're validating at these gates before people actually access this sensitive data.
And that's a really great point. And I haven't thought too much about how you lose a lot of that network telemetry you speak of once we're out at the edge. I haven't really thought about that. That's an interesting point. I do know that one of the things that happened during COVID, one thing Zyston brought to market was to help customers quickly assess their ability to support remote workforce, right? And one of those is, it's really twofold. We had to stop and look at their architectures and see how their tool stack architecture changed now we pushed everyone in the field. To your point, Greg, you lose all that telemetry. And number two was, how are we going to allow people to access and kind of get down to that zero trust when they're coming in remotely? And those are great points, you guys. Great answers here. And moving right along, I've got a question from Christian. What are the biggest pain points you are seeing from organizations who have moved to remote workforce monitoring, or just remote workforce, with the accelerated to the cloud and security concerns involved? I know we've talked a little bit about that. Greg, is there anything you would add to that based on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've all kind of touched on a lot of these in different angles, right? Like it's just this evolving kind of issue that we're just, having to adapt, really figure out. One interesting thing, I know we got a question from Shane in here about what recommendations we can make on protecting the endpoint itself at home. I think that's a key component, because all these endpoints are connected now to the same network that your work assets are on. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of those things where, if you're looking at like an AV solution for home, like unfortunately we don't sell one, our company doesn't, but if you have like a Windows laptop, Windows Defender is actually really good now. I would say, just make sure that that's enabled, that you're keeping everything up to date. Otherwise, I would look into these kind of, free or cheap sort of home antivirus solutions. But it really depends on how nerdy you want to get. I mean, you could set up a whole SIM at home and monitor all your DNS traffic and stuff like that. But the hard part is most people aren't going to have the time or effort or the capacity to do that.
Yeah, I'm already IT support at my house, and I don't need to put in a SIM, all right? So please don't bring that up. David, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I see from a kind of corporation perspective that you see everybody going to the Office 365 model, and they buy into the E5 licensing, but they have not configured any of the kind of capabilities within it. And I had a healthcare client not too long ago. Had all the bells and whistles. Had O365 APT, and had cloud app security. They had Azure information protection, and literally none of it was configured. And when it kind of came down to it, that I would say once you get that licensing in place, you need to do some due diligence in designing out that capability. Zyston actually has a capability where we go out and we actually look at your configuration and evaluate, is that kind of leading practice or best practice Is there basically risk that's, not being mitigated using the solution? So, my comment is, I would ensure that whatever you have from a security capabilities and the remote workforce kind of function, that those things are in tune, that they're active, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then you also need a pair of eyes, or set of eyes, looking at them. And I just tend to see clients in some cases that literally are not monitoring that in an active way. They do it once a month and then, look at it. But you really, just from a threat perspective, you just need to continuously kind of monitor for those threats, for sure.
Yeah, I have a question here, and I'm really, Greg, based off your experience around all your threat research, how have adversaries advanced the past year, and what is the most concerning trends that y'all are tracking over at VMware Carbon Black?
Yeah, that's a great question. The biggest ones, I would say, we have a couple kind of primary concerns. The biggest one is the uptick in destructive attacks. Not talking just ransomware, but like wipers and tools that are specifically targeting, like destroying databases, destroying systems, and particularly where we've seen some of these sort of attacks targeting. The big companies we've seen most targeted by just purely destructive attacks are in the energy sector. Providing this core fundamental infrastructure that we all use every day. It's pretty scary to see these specific like ICS types of attacks, specific malware that's targeting these sort of systems, that their goal is pretty much just to go and wipe computer systems in these networks that run core infrastructure for our country. That I would say is probably some of the scariest stuff. And we have many documented instances of this in the past. If you look at NotPetya, which was by the Sandworm group crew, which is out of Russia's GRU, that crew has been, they've pulled off some pretty scary attacks. Like they've targeted Ukraine, all the time. That's pretty much their test bed for these types of attacks. They caused rolling blackouts in Kiev in Ukraine a few years ago that were significantly detrimental. I mean, all of a sudden people are coming home from work and they can't use their ATM, their card in the ATM, the lights are going out, the trains are not running. So some significantly concerning things can come about from attacking our infrastructure. But the next other concerning trend that we're following now is this kind of phenomenon that's been exploding in popularity on the underground forums for, I want to say, the last like 18 to 20 months or so, is what we're dubbing access mining. And so this is basically selling direct access into corporations, basically going in, breaching them. Usually it's this opportunistic kind of attacks. They're scanning for open remote desktop protocol, open SSH without multi-factor, using dictionary style attacks to gain access to these systems, getting in, mapping out the organization, understanding what they do, figuring out if they can steal data, all these other things they could potentially profit from. But then basically providing this access either through the protocol they broke in through initially, or through remote access tools or various other backdoors that they deploy in these organizations. But they're going out and selling just direct access into these companies. And they go from anywhere from like $1,000 to $100,000 plus, depending on the type of organization it is, what the potential ROI would be for someone to maybe ransomware that organization or go in through it for espionage reasons or what have you. But the reason I think this is so concerning is it very much lowers the bar to entry. You can go and say, buy access to a ransomware as a service type of solution, and then buy access into an organization. And you don't have to actually know how to hack. You don't have to know how to do anything. All you have to know how to do is click the buttons and talk with the support people on each of these systems. And you can go and actually make, hundreds of thousands of dollars ransomware companies without any clue what you're actually doing. So I think that lowering the bar to entry is really concerning, because there's a lot of people, when you watch the chatter on these forums, that are, you know, very immature. You know, there's a lot of young people out there that just kind of want to cause chaos and stuff like that. So if they have the money to gain access to some of these resources with cryptocurrencies, it can be significantly damaging.
And that's crazy, going from what used to be 6-month campaigns to get in to literally 8 to 12 hours when you have access to all these tools and ransomware as a service. It's like you said, it's changing so significantly. David, I have one for you, and it said, hold on, let me pull it up real quick. For firms who are dealing with budget cuts at the same time they are dealing with increased security risk, how do you prioritize risk management?
Well, it's a difficult thing. You know, I'd always say, unfortunately, the scenario is, what's the biggest budget can opener? A breach. And unfortunately, when a breach happens, basically all eyes are on it, and people are, you know, spending money and such. But, you know, to proactively assess risk and evaluate what your exposure is on right now is a big problem. You know, my trick in always going out and getting budget and really, you know, making kind of the pitch to focus on, you know, people, process, technology, and building that out is, some people use the scare tactic and try to scare, you know, their board into saying, well, you know, Home Depot was breached, and that's one of our kind of competitors, and we need to actually do something that's due diligent. And that works in some cases, but I think if you have a really kind of well-defined kind of risk model strategy, you can really help them to say, well, here is what our portfolio looks like. You know, here are our capabilities. We know we have risks. Here are my prioritized risks of what I would actually like to focus on. And with that comes, you know, effort and cost, and some of that means, you know, technology and equipment too. So if you have that really well-defined kind of model, and you know from highest risk to lowest risk, and what's the biggest bang for your buck, you know, you can articulate that to the board and simply say, we know these are problems. Help us to achieve, you know, remediation results, and here comes the dollars. We know what those are, and if you really prepare for that, the board understands. I mean, they're no dummies. You know, they think about business risk all the time, and you need to it's putting it into the personal side of it, which is really important. You know, I heard of a true story. I won't say who it was, but walked into a board meeting one time and gave everybody a piece of paper, and they look at the piece of paper, and it's their password. And the board was like, what the heck? How do you know my password? Well, I found it out on the internet. And you know, they did a dictionary text, but that literally changed and got them involved, and just totally put them a little bit on a side and said, well, I don't know if it's scaring them, but it literally is telling you that everybody out there there's a lot of nefarious kind of actors out there. And if I can find your password out on the internet, you know, who doesn't say the thief, that actor is not going to do that. And my personal opinion is, if you can get involved kind of personally into, you know, we're protecting our customers, our employees, our board members, you know, in many cases, high net worth individuals. If you can make that personal, and you can show that you have a well-defined strategy around mitigating risk, I think most times you win, and you get kind of what you want, you ask for.
Yeah, great. You know, I'm going to end. This is the last question we'll have for this webinar, and it's going directly to Greg. And Greg, you know, there's all the industry talks about EDR, MDR, and that R, which is response, remediate. how do you see the future, and really talk to me how you guys see importance of remediation for security programs, because I know y'all focus Carbon Black VMware, VMware Carbon Black, sorry, y'all are experts at this. Any thoughts to close up on that?
Yeah. I mean, EDR is something where I think it's one of the most beneficial technologies we've seen in quite some time. You know, before I joined VMware Carbon Black, I was a Carbon Black customer. You know, for multiple years when I was at a different security vendor focused on SIM technology. And, you know, being a SIM vendor at the time, one of the most beneficial tools that we had in terms of just rich data sets that we could ingest into the SIM was our EDR data. And that was something where, you know, taking the data from the EDR tool and then visualizing it in a SIM is extremely powerful, because then you have that ability to do long tail analysis across large amounts of data. And you can actually, you know, visualize all of this data in a different way. We actually found an incident at the time when we were first deploying Carbon Black. And it was a actual new attack. It was the Squibbly Do attack created or essentially discovered by Casey Smith. And this was back when he had first started working on this and started publishing his research around it. So there were no alerts in any of the products for this yet. No one was really looking for the lull bin type of activity that is so commonplace today. So we actually found this by seeing regserve 32 as the top process across all of our assets within our company. For the past like week or so, I think was the data set we were looking at in our dashboard. Wow. And we're like, why is regserve 32 pegging? Like, why is this way more active than anything else in our network? And it was just that long tail analysis of looking at the top processes. So we drilled down into that, and we actually found that it was from one single user system as well. And so taking that a step further, we looked into it and saw the command line activities, and actually ended up being this PowerShell kind of loop that was using regserve 32 to establish persistence with their command and control server. And so, you know, that was just something where it's like, oh man, like Carbon Black didn't have rules for this yet. We didn't have rules for this yet, but it was something we were able to find just by looking into those abnormalities in the data. So that's why, you know, I've always been a big component of EDR, having that visibility into the exact details of what your processes are doing. You can also fill in the gaps of, I mean, it's essentially, you could do even key logging, you know, with these types of tools, which is very important to look at, you know, what's happening with PowerShell, Bash, Python, you know, all these various kind of tools that attackers are going to use. And then correlating this and aggregating this in such a way where you can look at the whole picture much easier. And that's something now that we're under VMware. It's really cool to see the move towards XDR, which is essentially looking at, you know, taking, you know, what SIM was supposed to be, what SIM's goal has been, I think, for many years, but looking at, you know, how we take not just EDR data, but how we correlate that with what we're seeing with network data, and how we're able to tie all these kind of pieces together and visualize that and make it easier for our customers and security analysts alike to understand. The key, though, is you have to have people that understand and you know, have the experience to really understand the endpoints. Endpoints insanely complicated in terms of the attacks and understanding the details of processes. So that's where that managed detection and response, I think, is very key. Having people that have those skills, have that deep understanding of the endpoint, and then that is their core job, you know, on top of your existing security program, is going to provide a tremendous amount of value.
Wow, yeah, great answer. So I just wanted to finish up here. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our attendees that showed up today for their lunch, gave us their hour. Please do not hesitate again to reach out on LinkedIn to the panel and myself. Man, Greg, I got to tell you, it's been a great journey getting to meet and collaborate with you. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time today. And David Stanton, like always, man, it's great to be on the team. I love having you here, and it's been a fun conversation, you guys. I'd like to thank Tim and Kyle on the Zyston side, and Julia on the VMware Carbon Black. And most of all, really appreciate all y'all's time, everybody. Cheers, guys.